true that the billionaires that I've met, anyway, the tech billionaires, are looking for ways, really they're looking for how can they earn enough money to escape from the reality they've created by earning money in that way. Right? So if you make your money by sending kids into mines in Africa to get the rare earth metals, or to create social media networks that lead girls to abuse themselves and lead to a society of confusion and chaos, you're going to want to get away from that. So you're going to want to build an isolated fortress in Maui or New Zealand, or a rocket ship to get to Mars, or move in with the president in Mar-a-Lago and keep the rest of us at bay. Right? It's odd. When do you ask, why do we keep supporting a technology society like that? Well, on the one hand, I think because many of us believe, and perhaps it's true, that the only way out is through. That we've screwed up the environment so much that we need Monsanto and Genentech and whoever it is to figure out how to grow genomic mushrooms on rocks because there's no more topsoil. So that we keep pushing further and further, even though we're getting more and more evidence that these kinds of foods don't actually nourish the body in the right way, that they don't feed the gut biome, that they don't understand what we are, that actually we've got to move towards unprocessed natural things. We've got to get back toward rainforest and all those things that we're leaving behind. But I think there's a certain faith that the only way out is through. And many of us, I'm lucky that I don't, but many of us spend a lot of our time on the platforms these men have developed. So if you are living on X, Twitter, or you're living on Facebook, you're essentially living under what we would call feudalism. You're living on a private platform, and all of the rules are created by the person at the top. And in the case of X, a person at the top who is using the algorithms of the platform to aggrandize themselves and their own points of view. And once you're okay with that in an online space, you start to become okay with that in the real world, right? So living in a place where one person is in charge of everything leads you to feel like, well, that's okay in the real world too. So Musk's migration from X Twitter to the White House is kind of natural for a lot of the folks, at least the fans who've been living in those environments.
Welcome to the Dov Baron Show. Come for the stories, stay for the learning. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I consult with and guide businesses, teams, and very high-performing leaders on how to harness their emotional source code to move their tribe. Let me ask you, do you remember when heroes were parents and uncles and aunts and maybe coaches, or at least morally driven superheroes? What happened? In a world where fame and followers are more often sort of eclipse moral courage, have we lost sight of what truly makes a hero, or somebody at least to aspire to? Today we're diving into the heart of heroism, particularly in a digital age. What drives our admiration? Is it genuine achievement, or has social conditioning skewed our perspective towards the superficial? Well, joining us for this provocative exploration is one of the sharpest minds in media theory and digital ethics, Douglas Rushkoff. Now, he's somebody whose work I've actually admired for years. Like a very long time ago, he and I had a conversation about this, that I had read a piece of his work like 20 years ago and always kept him in my mind because he really had a different way of looking at things. He's been challenging social norms long before social media turned everyone into a brand. Douglas is not just an observer, but a challenger of the status quo. His books like Team Human, Survival of the Richest, they dissect the complexities of human anatomy in a tech-saturated landscape. MIT heralded him as one of the world's top 10 influential intellectuals, consistently pushing us to question our path and the forces that nudge us along that path. From his groundbreaking documentaries with PBS, Frontline, to his thought-provoking podcast, Doug's insights have compelled us to look beyond the echo chambers of modern media. So are you ready to challenge your heroes and maybe even find a new path forward? Turn up the volume and help me to welcome the Marshall McLuhan award-winning Douglas Rushkoff. Welcome, sir.
Hey, good to be with you.
I'm really looking forward to this combo. As I said, I actually have really admired your stuff for a long time. So I always like to sort of go back and dig around to where everything came from, because nobody started out that way. So I believe you grew up in Queens in New York. What were some of the most influential experiences from your childhood that really shaped your view really on technology moving forward?
It's interesting. I guess I had two main threads I've been following since I was around 4. One of them, technology-wise, was TV. I was really interested in TV. When you're a baby and you grow up with TV, you actually think that there's something in there behind the glass. And then I thought all TV was live. Reckoning with TV in some ways was a series of disillusionments about what was going on. What? Bugs is not in there, right? And the other thread was capitalism. Whether I understood it or not, I associated getting wealthier with us getting less happy. When you brought up Queens, New York, first thing that came to mind was these barbecues we would have at the end of the block. We lived on a dead end in Queens, a middle class or lower middle class, working class neighborhood with one barbecue at the end of the block. Just a bunch of cement cinder blocks and some metal things. And when I'm 3, 4 years old, my mom would give me a weenie, a hot dog, say, go down and have someone grill it. So the barbecue would be on from 3 or 4 in the afternoon on Friday, seemingly until Sunday morning. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't, but I was a kid. You could go down there and somebody, a neighbor, Selma Solomon, Renee Haber, they would cook your dog for you. And it was this communal weekend-long thing. Then my dad got a better job. He was a bookkeeper. He became a CPA, a certified public accountant, and then got a real accounting job. So we moved from Queens to Larchmont, this nice, wealthier, upper middle class community in Westchester. There's no barbecue pit at the end of the block. No. Everyone has their own Weber grill in their own backyard. So the barbecue went from being this communal thing to being an isolated thing with the hedges around our yard. They're cooking a sirloin. We're cooking porterhouse. They're cooking lobster tails. So we'll get filet mignon. So barbecuing with the Joneses became barbecuing against the Joneses.
Wow.
So there was that. That was my experience of and my experience of media that went along with it. The show I was a fan of, I know we're supposed to like Star Trek, but I was a fan of the show called Lost in Space, which was about this family that took off in a rocket ship, and they ended up, there was the bad guy, Dr. Smith, who pushed them off course, and they end up lost in space.
Warning, warning, alien approaching.
Exactly, the robot. Right. So they go, and they end up, the second and third season, they're stuck on this one planet, and aliens come to the door. And to me, that was the experience of going from the city to the suburbs. We moved out to this place. We landed in the middle of nowhere, and people who came to the door were like an alien species. They were regarded with suspicion. And the only thing I had as my friend, my robot, was the TV, that bright flashing light that I could sit and learn everything I needed. And if I didn't, I could change the channel and find something else. So those sort of formative experiences were media and technology becoming the substitutes for the neighborhood and the community I'd left behind.
That's really fascinating because we're certainly living in a time. I've got a course on this called Creating Cultures of Belonging. And I'm writing a new book on the same subject because we're so desperate for community, certainly in a post-pandemic world more than ever.
Mm-hmm.
But for those of us like you and I who are over a certain age, we remember a community. I was born in a very poor environment, and I often talk about where I grew up was a lot of crime and violence and addiction and all those kinds of things. But in the daytime, every door was open.
Yeah.
And so if my mom had to take one of my siblings to the doctor's, she would just say to her neighbor, take care of Dov, whatever it was. And they would feed me with sandwiches or whatever it was. And that was very normal. Now everybody's door's closed and everybody's afraid.
Right. You can't even make a phone call without texting the person first. Is this a good time to call?
You certainly can't drop in on anybody. People are going to royally be pissed if you show up at their front door. Whereas when I was a kid, I remember people showing up at the front door. It was like, oh, yeah, nice to see you.
Exactly. But that's why I was so hopeful about the internet when it first came up. I was a theater director. That was the way I recreated my experience of community. I loved theater. I loved making theater more than the actual shows themselves, because once they were being performed, most of the audiences weren't coming for that. They were coming to oh, I'm going to see that play about AIDS so I don't have to worry about AIDS anymore. They would come, it was expensive, it was elitist. But then, just as I was getting sick of theater and realizing it wasn't going to create the community I wanted, the internet came up and I thought, finally, the people's medium. People are going to reach through the screen. They're going to re-socialize, right? They're going to sort of recover from the alienation of the television era, reconnect, and then forge a new society together. And it looked like that was going to happen until a year or two in.
You were very pro that world in your earlier writings about how you were excited about it. I certainly was too. And I believe Zuckerberg when he said, I want to create a place for people to reach out to each other. And of course, you've changed direction on that because you've seen evidence of that. Talk to us about that transition. When did you realize that that was your particular fantasy that had just gotten burst?
It's funny. Jerry Garcia once said, they asked him to talk about the 60s. And he said, the 60s happened in about a month and a half of 1968. And I feel like the internet happened in about 6 months of 1992. And it was interesting. In my very first book on the internet, it's called Siberia, and it was canceled by the publisher because they thought the internet would be over by 1993 when it was supposed to come out. Came out in 1994, did just fine. Thank you very much. But in that book, just as I was going to press, Wired magazine came out. And Wired magazine really recontextualized, it reframed the internet from this social people phenomenon to a business phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote in that very first book, we have a window of opportunity to create this wonderful social network thing that we're talking about. But if we don't seize it, there are other people who are willing to claim it for very different purposes. And from then on, then by 1994, I was already writing, look what they done to my song, that these were tools that people were going to use to create new possible futures, right? To create new possibilities. And instead they were turned on people to make people behave more predictably. They created the attention economy and eyeball hours and sticky websites and behavioral control. And we've been living in a Skinner box of behavioral modification ever since.
Yeah, that's very true. So I know that some of your early influences, because from your previous writings, you've written about Terence McKenna, about Timothy Leary, and other sort of counterculture figures, and about how you see that they've influenced the early digital culture. How do you assess their ultimate impact on today's digital landscape, and what parts of their vision do you feel have been sort of fundamentally misappropriated?
I mean, the psychedelic movement was, the 1960s and 70s psychedelic movement was really dominated, it's a strong word, but we'll use it, dominated by some really strong Catholic, Christian, white men who, for all of the transformation that was happening in them, for all the stuff they were seeing, they still had a very kind of Christian, Aristotelian, alpha, omega, beginning, middle, end, triumphant understanding of technology and everything. So it was a beautiful utopian vision they had, but it was, we're going to get there. We're going to do that. We're going to colonize cyberspace for the good.
Mm-hmm.
But they're still colonizing. They're still taking, they're still conquering. What psychedelics and the spirituality usually convey is being in the moment. Right now is when it's happening. Like I'm sure you tell business people, sure, yeah, you want to make $1 billion, whatever it is you want to do, but right now, what are you doing? How are you feeling about what you do? If you're not doing it in the moment, you're not doing it. You're going off your own course. It's right here, right now. So that was a kind of a blinder on early psychedelic and early internet culture. We're going to remake the world. We're going to realize the Gaia hypothesis. We're going to wire up humanity. We're going to this. We're going to that. We're going to this. And that's very much like having almost like a business plan for the world, rather than, this is beautiful right now, what's happening. Look at us talking to each other. Let's get into this, rather than, how do we exploit this for something else? So their influence was great in the sense of anything is possible, but there was a utopianism that was disconnecting from the experience, and it made it hard for those of us sort of in their thrall to realize what was important and what is it that we should be defending and what is it that we shouldn't. So we were confused a little bit at the time, and everybody was high and everybody was having fun. It was like a rave. We're going to see aliens. We're going to reach the next level of consciousness. It was a fun time, but it lacked an awareness of the greater contexts in which we were living.
But don't you think that that's kind of our way? You and I are old enough to remember certainly the echoes of the 60s, and then the very early, late 70s, early 80s, the New Age, Lazarus and other channelers of that time, Ramtha, and it was the same thing. I mean, it was a beautiful idea that had so much to offer. And I feel like a lot of these things get co-opted. I use an example of Black Lives Matter. Like Black Lives Matter started, I'm on board. Now I feel like I don't want anything to do with that. It's completely co-opted. And I feel like that's what's happened with so many things. And that's not to pick on Black Lives Matter. It's on any of those things that start out with a really beautiful idea about how we can evolve and what we can do. But it gets taken away, taken on board by somebody who's like, oh, we can use this to leverage that, as opposed to let's be with each other.
It's often because we don't realize the power in what we're doing. So you take early rave culture, and people thought that the real power of rave was that they're taking ecstasy and that the beats are coming at 120 beats a minute and we're getting really high. No, the real power of the early rave movement was that young people were commandeering public spaces for parties. That instead of going to clubs and paying all this money in an entry fee, they were going to a parking lot, putting up speakers and deciding this is fun because we declare it. By losing track of that, they were able to lose the movement. Same with the internet. The power of the internet, if you remember back in the early internet, before it was even called the internet, when it was still called ARPANET, and the government didn't have a purpose for it anymore because everybody was just talking about science fiction and physics and weird stuff, they offered it to AT&T. And AT&T turned it down. It's like for $1.79, they could have had the internet. And they were like, no, there's no profit in this thing. We don't even want it. That should have told us something, that the non-profit hobbyist nature of this experience, the non-commercial net, was so sexy. So many people used it. The average family this was a study they did in 1994, the average internet-connected home was watching 9 hours less commercial television a week. That threw the TV industry into panic. Oh no, they're going online and talking to each other instead of watching our shows. But we didn't realize that power. So when John Barlow came along, he was a great lyricist for the Grateful Dead, a counterculture guy, but also kind of a staunch libertarian macho dude. He wrote this thing in 96 called The Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. And it said, governments of the world, beware, we don't need you. We are our own thing. Back off. We are our own nation. Leave us alone. And all of us, we hated government back then. A lot of us were doing illegal drugs. Government was trying to shut down the internet because of indecency. They did something called the Indecency Act because they were scared that porn and kids were going to see porn online. The government was arresting hackers. They were breaking into the houses of 12 and 13-year-old kids because they had hacked into a shopping mall and changed the temperature on the thermostat. Just kids playing. They were like coming at them with machine guns, and throwing them in jail. So we didn't like government. But what we didn't realize was if you get rid of government, you just create a free reign for corporations. Like government and business sort of balance each other out, kind of like fungus and bacteria in the body. So if you just say government is gone, you create a free space for corporations. And that's what happened. They came in and really took this thing over. And we didn't realize that the non-commercial aspects of this were special and needed to be protected, at least needed a space alongside the shopping mall that the internet became.
We know that the wealthiest people in the world now are running these technology companies. And it's a follow-on from what you're saying. From your research and your expertise, why do you believe that we as in society continue to invest our resources, our trust, our hope in technological solutions, and the billionaires who promote them, their primary goal is not to solve our collective problems, but to create, as you've talked about, escape hatches for themselves from potential ecological or economic crisis?
I know it is interesting. It is true that the billionaires that I've met, anyway, the tech billionaires, are looking for ways, really, they're looking for how can they earn enough money to escape from the reality they've created by earning money in that way. Right. So if you make your money by sending kids into mines in Africa to get the rare earth metals, or to create social media networks that lead girls to abuse themselves and lead to a society of confusion and chaos, you're going to want to get away from that. So you're going to want to build an isolated fortress in Maui or New Zealand, or a rocket ship to get to Mars, or move in with the president in Mar-a-Lago and keep the rest of us at bay, right? It's odd. Linda, you ask, why do we keep supporting a technology society like that? Well, on the one hand, I think because many of us believe, and perhaps it's true, that the only way out is through, that we've screwed up the environment so much that we need Monsanto and Genentech and whoever it is to figure out how to grow genomic mushrooms on rocks because there's no more topsoil. So that we keep pushing further and further, even though we're getting more and more evidence that these kinds of foods don't actually nourish the body in the right way, that they don't feed the gut biome, that they don't understand what we are, that actually we've got to move towards unprocessed natural things. We've got to get back toward rainforest and all those things that we're leaving behind. But I think there's a certain faith that the only way out is through. And many of us, I'm lucky that I don't, but many of us spend a lot of our time on the platforms these men have developed. So if you are living on X, Twitter, or you're living on Facebook, you're essentially living under what we would call feudalism. You're living on a private platform, and all the rules are created by the person at the top. And in the case of X, a person at the top who is using the algorithms of the platform to aggrandize themselves and their own points of view. And once you're okay with that in an online space, you start to become okay with that in the real world, right? So living in a place where one person is in charge of everything leads you to feel like, well, that's okay in the real world too. So Musk's migration from Twitter to the White House is kind of natural for a lot of the folks, at least the fans who've been living in those environments.
That's really quite fascinating. So this social conditioning given to us by the social platforms has conditioned us to make things that would have seemed ludicrous not that long ago, certainly less than half my lifetime ago, to now become fairly normal and acceptable. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I believe from my research that you were invited by a bunch of these folks, these billionaires, to ask you about the future and what you saw. Am I off track?
Yeah, it wasn't as great as it's been pitched. Sometimes I've heard it told back to me as like these supervillains invited me to their lair, which is what it felt like. But really, it was a hedge fund. These hedge funds, they sometimes do these like annual events where they invite their 50 or their 100 top clients, the biggest investors, out to some resort, and they give them a menu of activities that they can do, like between their massages and facials, like learn to cook an omelet with Emerald, right? Learn to play guitar with this guy, or improve your golf swing with Jack Nicklaus. So they invited me to come out. I thought it was to do a talk about the digital future to a bunch of wealthy people. But when I got there, it turned out it was like, have lunch with a futurist is what they called it. Have lunch with a futurist. I didn't even know it was that. So I'm sitting in the green room, waiting for the guy to come in with the microphone for me to, the moment, waiting for the guy in the Patagonia shirt to come out and clip me up with a microphone and send me out. And I got my talk, I'm going over my notes. And these 5 guys come into the green room and sit around this table. And that's it. That's the talk. They don't want to hear my talk. They just start peppering me with these very binary questions about the future. They're like, virtual reality or augmented reality? Like, which one's going to dominate? Bitcoin or Ethereum? Where should they put their... And while I am admittedly a genius futurist and all that, don't ask me those questions. I knew that video cassettes were coming, but I would have said Betamax.
Well, it was better. It wasn't just called beta. It was better.
It was better. Or I would have said CompuServe, not AOL, right? So I'm right about the thing, but don't ask me who's it. I would say Ethereum, and it's probably Bitcoin. But then finally they got to this question. The guy said, Alaska or New Zealand? And I'm like, huh? And he's like, which is the better place to put our bunker, given what you know of the climate catastrophe and World Bank projections and governments and all? I'm kind of an intellectual dominatrix in a way. I spend a lot of my time when I'm with these people kind of teasing them. I figure that's part of what they're paying me for is, thank you, sir, may I have another? Let's bring in a guy that looks like a Marxist and have him criticize us for an hour. So we've paid our penance to the left or whatever. So I'm saying, so you're going to build a place. How are you going to protect your fortress from the rest of us? And we said, oh, we've got Navy SEALs who are coming. We got Navy SEALs on standby. They've got a gassed up helicopter. They're going to come. They'll pick us up and then they'll protect us in the fortress. Like, oh, so they'll protect you. So how are you going to pay your Navy SEALs after your money is worthless in this apocalypse? One of the guys opens his little moleskin book and he's like, how to pay Navy SEALs after money is worth. They hadn't even thought of this, right? They've got like one level deep Walking Dead scenario. They remind me more of like a Billionaire with a train set. It's a simulation thing or Sim City game that they haven't thought. So they spend the rest of the hour with me thinking about how do they maintain control over the security staff. One of them said, well, what if I'm the only one who knows the combination to the safe where we keep the food? Like, oh, Navy SEALs, they've got no experience getting information out of people, right? You're going to spend the entire apocalypse getting waterboarded by these guys. Or another one was like, oh, we could have implants that will give them access to different rooms. And if they misbehave, they could act as like kind of disciplinary kind of shock collar things. Navy SEALs are going to really take to shocking them in their forearms with something. Finally, I started saying to them, the way to maintain control of your security force in the apocalypse is to be really nice to them now. And I suggested kind of facetiously, why don't you get your head of security and pay for his daughter's bat mitzvah? It would be hard for him to shoot you between the eyes if he knows, oh, that's the guy that paid for my daughter's bat mitzvah. And be nice to them, be nice to their family, be nice to their friends. And then one of them finally asked, he said, well, yeah, that sounds good, but where does it stop? You're nice to your employees, you're nice to their families, you're nice to their friends. Where do you stop that being nice to people?
Like there should be a limit on that, surely.
Because otherwise, right, you can't be nice to everyone. It's like, but actually you kind of can. If you believe that your business is doing something, and this is the problem, most of them don't. But if you believe the actual business proposition is doing something good for the world, you don't even have to worry about what they call effective altruism. You don't have to try to make enough money so you can give money to charity. The thing you are doing, Joe's Pizza makes people happy with its pizza.
Yes.
So that's his contribution is the pizza, and that's fine.
Meaning and purpose. So are you allowed to say who these folks were?
No, they'll kill me. They had people there. They had people there with them that would scare the dickens out of you. Ex-Mossad, crush your skull.
That's quite the gig. Well, we're already at the end of part one of the show. I'm loving this. Thank you so much for this. I want to make sure that people know how to find you. I know you have a podcast, you have multiple books and TV shows and all the rest of it. Please tell people where they can find out more about you and all of your resources.
Well, if you can remember Team Human, maybe we could talk more about that idea in the second half. Remember Team Human, and you'll find me. It's the book that's the most Dove, I would say, Team Human, because it's great. It's really about being human as a team sport, and you can't do this alone. What does that mean when you finally accept that? And I've got a podcast by the same name, Team Human, which is just becoming a real... I was shooting the thing. I agreed to shoot it at this place because this guy's like, I just love what you do. Just come. We'll see what happens. While I'm shooting it, a guy there saw me what I was doing and wants to sponsor the whole thing for a year. So magic is real. Magic is real. So now I'm going to do it like you with real video and the whole 9 yards. So come Team Human. Yeah. It works.
We'll make sure that the links are all posted in the show notes. So if you didn't catch it, don't worry about it. We'll make sure it's there. And we'll post all of the links to where you can get all Doug's resources. So we're going to be back in just one click. Until then, just curious about who you're letting lead you round by the nose. And by that, I mean by what you've made okay without actually consciously thinking about it. So you've just passively given power over to. Something to think about as you go into part two. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious. We'll be back in just one click.